In the summer of 1863, over 50,000 American boys walked into a small Pennsylvania town. Less than half of them would walk out. Gettysburg would become the bloodiest battle in American history, a 3-day nightmare of bullets, bayonets, and brothers killing brothers. And the whole thing started by accident. Here's what really happened during those 3 days that changed everything. Hey, if you're back again, thanks for being here. Subscribe if you want more, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. Always makes me smile seeing comments from Texas at midnight next to someone in Manchester having breakfast. Now, let's go back to July 1863. But first, get comfortable. Seriously, adjust those pillows, pull up that blanket, because where we're going, you're going to want to be cozy. The people we're about to meet didn't have that luxury. Picture a small town in southeastern Pennsylvania. Population maybe 2,400. Gettysburg is one of those crossroads towns where 10 different roads come together like spokes on a wheel. There's a seminary on a ridge west of town where young men train to become Lutheran ministers. There's a college. Shops line the main streets. Farms spread out in every direction, their fields golden with summer wheat. It's peaceful, quiet, the kind of place where nothing much ever happens. That's about to change. See, the Confederate Army under Robert E. Lee has been marching north, 70,000 men moving through Maryland and into Pennsylvania. Lee's won battle after battle against the Union, and he figures if he can win a big victory on northern soil, maybe the North will finally give up. Maybe they'll let the South go. Maybe this whole ugly war can finally end. The Union Army is chasing him. 93,000 men under a brand new commander named George Meade. And here's the thing about Meade. He's only been in charge for 3 days. 3 days. Imagine getting handed the entire fate of your nation with basically zero preparation time. That's George Meade right now. Neither army actually plans to fight at Gettysburg. Nobody picks it on a map and says, yeah, that's where we'll have the biggest battle in American history. It just happens. The Confederates hear there might be shoes in Gettysburg. Their men need shoes. So on June 30th, a Confederate brigade walks into town looking for supplies. Instead, they find Union cavalry. Not militia, not farmers with pitchforks. Real cavalry from the Army of the Potomac, led by a guy named John Buford who knows exactly what he's looking at. He sends word back, the Confederates are here. Come quick. The morning of July 1st, 1863, breaks warm and hazy. The air smells like summer, cut hay and wildflowers. In a few hours it'll smell like something else entirely. John Buford's cavalry has set up on the ridges west of town. They're outnumbered badly, but Buford's got one advantage. He knows help is coming. The First Corps of the Union Army is marching hard toward Gettysburg, and at its head rides a man named John Reynolds. Now let me tell you about John Reynolds, because you need to understand who this guy was before you understand what happens next. Reynolds is 42 years old, born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, just 50 miles from where he's riding right now. He graduated from West Point, served in the Mexican War, taught at the military academy. People call him the best general in the entire Union Army. And here's the wild part. Just a few weeks ago, President Lincoln offered him command of the whole army. Reynolds turned it down. He didn't want politicians telling him how to fight, so instead, he's here, leading from the front like he always does. Some generals stay back and read reports. Reynolds rides with his men. He wants to see. He wants to know. Reynolds reaches the seminary building around 10 in the morning and finds Buford waiting for him. Buford points west toward the Chambersburg Pike, where Confederate infantry is already pushing forward. "What's the situation?" Reynolds asks. Buford doesn't sugarcoat it. "The devil's to pay." Reynolds makes a decision that changes everything. He could pull back, wait for more troops, let Gettysburg go. Instead, he sends word to General Meade, "We're fighting here." He commits the entire Union army to this ground. This little crossroads town nobody's ever heard of. The First Corps starts arriving. Among them is the Iron Brigade. These men wear distinctive black hats instead of the usual blue caps. They're from Wisconsin, Michigan, and Indiana. They've never lost a fight. Never. The Confederates have learned to respect those black hats. When they see them coming, they know they're in for a rough day. Reynolds personally rides into McPherson's woods to position the 2nd Wisconsin Regiment. He's right there at the front, close enough to smell the powder, close enough to hear the bullets whipping through the leaves. "Forward, men! Forward!" he shouts. "For God's sake, drive those fellows out of those woods!" Those are the last words he ever speaks. A bullet hits him in the back of the neck. Some say it was a Confederate sharpshooter. Others say it was just a random shot in the chaos. Either way, John Reynolds falls from his horse, dead before he hits the ground. Think about that. One of the Union's best generals, dead in the first hour of the first day. His men don't even know yet. They're still charging into those woods, screaming, their black hats bobbing through the smoke and the trees. They drive the Confederates back across a little creek called Willoughby Run. They capture a Confederate general named Archer, the first Confederate general taken prisoner since the war began. But Reynolds is gone. His body is carried to the rear, past men still rushing forward into the fight, past civilians peeking out of windows, watching their quiet town transform into a war zone. His aides wrap him in an army blanket and load him onto a wagon. The news spreads through the ranks like fire. Reynolds is dead. Reynolds is dead. And in the confusion, something else is happening. Something that sounds made up, but I promise you is completely real. There's a man walking through Gettysburg with a musket over his shoulder. He's got white hair, a lined face, and a stubborn set to his jaw. His name is John Burns, and he's 69 years old. 69. He fought in the War of 1812, back when most of the men dying today weren't even born yet. When the Confederates first passed through Gettysburg a few days earlier, Burns made such a nuisance of himself that they threw him in jail overnight. Now they're back, and this old man has decided he's had enough. He's going to fight. Burns walks up to Colonel Langhorne Wister of the 150th Pennsylvania and asks if he can join the battle. Wister looks at this elderly civilian with his ancient musket and basically tells him to go stand in the woods where he won't get killed. Burns does not go stand safely in the woods. Burns walks right out to the skirmish line, right out into the open fields where bullets are flying, and starts shooting at Confederates. The soldiers around him are shocked, amused, impressed. Here's this old man, somebody's grandfather, calmly loading and firing while men half his age are dying all around him. At one point, Burns borrows a modern rifle from a wounded soldier because his old musket is too slow to reload. He just keeps fighting. He'll be wounded 3 times before the day is over, shot in the arm, the leg, and the chest. When the Union line finally collapses and the Confederates sweep over the field, Burns buries his ammunition and pretends to be a confused old civilian caught in the crossfire. They buy it. They leave him alone. He crawls back home, gets patched up by his wife, and becomes a national hero. 4 months later, Abraham Lincoln will come to Gettysburg to dedicate a cemetery for the Union dead. The first person Lincoln asks to meet is John Burns. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. It's still July 1st and the battle is only getting started. More Union troops are pouring in now. The 11th Corps arrives from the south and deploys north of town. More Confederate divisions are arriving too, coming down from the north and northwest. By early afternoon, the Union has maybe 22,000 men on the field. The Confederates have 27,000, and more are coming. The fighting spreads across the ridges and fields west of town. The Iron Brigade is holding McPherson's Ridge, but they're taking terrible casualties. At one point, the 24th Michigan loses 80% of its men. 80%. Imagine going into a fight with 10 of your friends and coming out with 2. The air fills with smoke. Not wispy smoke like from a campfire. Thick, choking, sulphurous smoke from thousands of muskets and dozens of cannon. It burns your eyes, coats your throat. Men can barely see 20 yards ahead. They're firing at shadows, at muzzle flashes, at sounds. The noise is like nothing you've ever heard. You know how loud a single gunshot is? Now multiply that by thousands and add cannon fire. The ground shakes. Your ears ring. Men are screaming. Horses are screaming. Officers are shouting orders that nobody can hear. In the town of Gettysburg, civilians are hiding in their cellars. Some have fled to relatives in the countryside. Others couldn't leave or wouldn't leave. They hear the battle getting closer, moving toward them like a thunderstorm that won't pass. One woman named Sarah Broadhead writes in her diary that the shells are bursting over the town, that she can see wounded men being carried past her window, that she's never been so frightened in her life. Another family cowers in their basement as bullets punch through the walls of their house. There's a young woman at her sister's house on Baltimore Street. Her name is Mary Virginia Wade, but everyone calls her Jenny. She's 20 years old, pretty, engaged to a soldier named Jack who's off fighting somewhere in Virginia. Her sister just had a baby, and Jenny has come to help. Right now, she's probably kneading dough for bread, trying to ignore the sound of guns getting closer. She doesn't know it yet, but she'll become famous, for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the Union line is starting to crack. The 11th Corps, positioned north of town, is stretched too thin. When 2 fresh Confederate divisions hit them from the north, the line buckles, then it breaks. Men who've been fighting all day suddenly find enemies appearing on their flanks, behind them, everywhere. The order goes out to fall back through the town. What happens next is chaos. Thousands of Union soldiers pour into the streets of Gettysburg. Some are retreating in good order, stopping to fire, falling back to the next corner, fighting every step. Others have completely broken, throwing away their rifles, running for their lives. Confederate soldiers are right behind them, shooting, stabbing, grabbing prisoners. The streets become a battlefield. Soldiers fight hand to hand in alleys, in doorways, in gardens. A woman watches from her window as blue and grey uniforms blur together in the smoke. She's been folding bandages all morning, preparing to help the wounded. Now the wounded are everywhere. Bullets crack through windows. Shells explode in intersections. A Union officer is shot dead on someone's front porch. Civilians who came out to help the wounded have to dive back inside their houses as the battle rolls over them like a wave. Some families find Union soldiers hiding in their cellars, their barns, their outbuildings. Men too wounded to retreat. Men who got separated from their units. Men who are just scared and lost. The families hide them, feed them, pray the Confederates. Won't search too carefully. By late afternoon, the Union Army has retreated to the hill south of town. Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, a long ridge that curves around like a fishhook. The ground is higher here, easier to defend. The men dig in, piling up whatever they can find for cover. Rocks, fence rails, dirt. The Confederates hold the town and the ridges to the west. Their commander, Robert E. Lee, rides forward to see the situation for himself. The old Virginian, his beard going grey, his face showing the strain of 2 years of brutal war. He can see the Union position on the hills. He knows his men are exhausted but victorious. The question now is whether to press the attack. Lee sends word to General Richard Ewell, commanding the Confederate troops closest to the Union line. Take those heights if practicable, if you think you can do it. Ewell looks at Cemetery Hill. He looks at his tired, scattered men, and he decides not to attack. This becomes one of the great what-ifs of the Civil War. If Ewell had attacked that evening, before the Union could dig in, before reinforcements arrived, could he have rolled up the whole position? Some historians say yes. Others say his men were too exhausted, too disorganized, that it would have been a disaster. We'll never know, because Ewell doesn't attack. As the sun sets on July 1st, 1863, both armies settle into their positions. The Union has lost badly today. Nearly 9,000 casualties. Reynolds is dead. 2 entire corps have been mauled, but they hold the high ground, and more troops are marching through the night to reinforce them. The Confederates have won the day. They've pushed the Yankees out of Gettysburg and inflicted heavy losses, but they haven't destroyed the Union Army. They haven't ended the war. And Robert E. Lee knows that every hour that passes, more Union reinforcements are arriving. Tomorrow will be worse. Tomorrow the real killing will begin. In Gettysburg, the citizens are emerging from their hiding places to find their town transformed. There are wounded men lying in the streets, in their yards, on their porches. There are dead horses blocking roads. There are bullet holes in almost every building. The smell of gunpowder hangs over everything like a fog. Some of the townspeople begin turning their homes into hospitals. Churches, schools, barns, any building with a roof becomes a place to pile wounded soldiers. Union and Confederate side by side. The doctors work by candlelight, sawing off limbs, pulling out bullets, doing what they can with almost nothing. Jenny Wade and her mother are still at her sister's house on Baltimore Street, still trying to care for the newborn baby, still trying to pretend everything is normal while the world burns around them. And 69-year-old John Burns is back in his house, his wife bandaging his wounds, probably already thinking about what he'll do if the Confederates come back tomorrow. The stars come out over Gettysburg. The sounds of battle fade. For a few hours there's something like peace. It won't last. The sun comes up on July 2nd and the world looks different. All through the night, soldiers have been marching toward Gettysburg. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Their boots wearing grooves into the dirt roads, their canteens clanking, their breath coming hard in the humid Pennsylvania darkness. By morning, both armies have nearly doubled in size. The Union has about 69,000 men now, spread along the high ground south of town. If you looked down from above, their line would look like a giant fishhook. The curved part wraps around Culp's Hill on the right. The shank runs down Cemetery Ridge, and the eye of the hook rests on 2 rocky hills at the far left called Big Roundtop and Little Roundtop. It's good ground. Any soldier can see that. High ground with clear fields of fire, stone walls to hide behind. The kind of position where a smaller force can hold off a bigger one if they do it right. The Confederates have 57,000 men stretched along Seminary Ridge, about a mile to the west. Between the two armies lies open farmland, wheat fields, orchards, a tangle of boulders the locals call Devil's Den, and somewhere in the middle, a peach orchard where the fruit is just starting to ripen. Robert E. Lee is up early, riding his grey horse traveller along the Confederate line, studying the Union position through his field glasses. Lee is 56 years old. His beard has gone almost completely white in the 2 years since the war began. He moves stiffly sometimes. His heart gives him trouble. But his mind is still sharp as a bayonet, and right now he's working out how to crack that Union line. Lee's plan is this: keep the Union right busy with a feint, a distraction. Meanwhile, send his best corps under General James Longstreet swinging around to hit the Union left. If Longstreet can roll up that flank, get behind Cemetery Ridge, cut the Union supply lines, the whole position falls apart. Game over. It's a good plan. Aggressive. The kind of thing that's worked for Lee before, but Longstreet doesn't like it. James Longstreet is Lee's most trusted general, a big, bearish man with a thick beard and sad eyes. He's lost 3 of his children to scarlet fever during the war. That kind of grief changes a man, makes him cautious maybe, makes him think hard about sending other people's sons to die. Longstreet wants to swing around the Union Army entirely, get between them and Washington, force the Yankees to attack Confederate positions for once, let someone else charge across open ground into rifle fire. Lee listens. Lee always listens. But Lee says no. They'll attack here. Today. Longstreet accepts the order, because that's what soldiers do. But he moves slowly. Some say too slowly. The attack that Lee wants at dawn doesn't happen until late afternoon. Hours slip away while Longstreet gets his men into position, hours that the Union uses to dig in deeper. And while all this is happening, one Union general decides to do something monumentally stupid, or brilliantly bold. Historians have been arguing about it for 160 years. Let me tell you about Daniel Sickles. Sickles is one of those guys who seems to have walked straight out of a bad novel. A New York politician, a charmer, a liar, a man who played by his own rules and somehow kept getting away with it. Before the war, Sickles was a congressman. He married a woman half his age, then carried on affairs all over Washington while she stayed home. When his wife finally had an affair of her own with the son of Francis Scott Key, the guy who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner, Sickles found out and shot the man dead. Broad daylight, right in Lafayette Square, across from the White House. And here's the thing, he got away with it. His lawyers invented a brand new legal defense, temporary insanity. First time it had ever been used in American history. Sickles walked free. Now he's a major general in the Union Army, commanding the 3rd Corps at Gettysburg. Not because he's a good soldier. He's not. He's never had any military training. He got the job because he's politically connected, because he raised troops in New York, because sometimes in war you give commands to men who have no business leading anyone. On the morning of July 2nd, Sickles looks at his assigned position. He's supposed to anchor his corps on the lower end of Cemetery Ridge, connecting to the 2nd Corps on his right and stretching down to Little Roundtop on his left. Standard defensive line, nothing fancy. But Sickles doesn't like it. About half a mile ahead he can see the peach orchard. It sits on slightly higher ground than his current position, and in Sickles' mind, higher ground is always better. He wants that orchard. General Meade, the army commander, is busy. He's got 100 problems to deal with. He's been in charge for less than a week. So when Sickles sends messages asking about his position, the responses are vague, frustrating. Sickles decides to take matters into his own hands. Without orders, Without permission, he marches his entire corps forward to occupy the peach orchard. It's a disaster waiting to happen. See, when you push forward like that, you create what military people call a salient, a bulge in your line, and bulges can be hit from multiple sides. Sickles' new position is exposed to attack from the west, the south, and the southwest. He's also opened a huge gap between his corps and Little Roundtop, leaving that critical hill almost completely undefended. Worst of all, Robert E. Lee's main attack is coming right at him. Sickles doesn't know this yet. He's feeling pretty good about himself, actually. He's got the high ground. He's shown initiative. He's done something instead of just sitting around waiting. Around 3 in the afternoon, General Meade finally rides over to see what Sickles is doing. He takes one look at the position, and his face goes pale. "General, I'm afraid you're too far out." Sickles offers to pull back, but it's too late. Even as they're talking, Confederate artillery opens up. The Battle of the Peach Orchard has begun, and now Sickles has to defend a position that never should have existed. Meade is furious, but there's no time for blame. He starts pulling troops from other parts of the line to shore up Sickles' exposed flanks. Men who are supposed to be resting are grabbed and rushed forward. The entire Union defensive plan is being rewritten on the fly. Meanwhile, Longstreet's assault is finally rolling forward. 2 Confederate divisions, maybe 15,000 men, come crashing out of the woods west of the peach orchard. They hit Sickles' line in 3 places at once: the wheat field, the peach orchard, Devil's Den. The wheat field is 26 acres of ripe grain trampled flat by charging soldiers. Over the next few hours it will change hands 6 times. 6 times. Each time more bodies piling up among the broken stalks. By the end of the day, the wheat will be beaten into the blood-soaked mud, and 6,000 men will have fallen in that single small field. Devil's Den is a maze of house-sized boulders on a low ridge. Confederate troops from Alabama and Texas claw their way through the rocks, shooting at defenders who pop up behind every crevice. It's close work. Brutal work. Men fight with rifles, with bayonets, with rocks grabbed off the ground. The gaps between the boulders fill with dead and wounded. A Confederate officer later said that the screaming from Devil's Den was the worst sound he ever heard. Not the gunfire, not the cannons, the screaming. In the peach orchard itself, Sickles' men are holding on but barely. The trees that seemed like such good cover are splintering under artillery fire, sending wooden shrapnel flying everywhere. Men duck behind the low stone walls, fire a shot, duck again, reload, fire, duck, the rhythm of staying alive. And then, around 6 in the evening, a cannonball finds Daniel Sickles. He's sitting on his horse trying to direct the battle, when a 12-pound solid shot smashes into his right leg. The bone shatters, blood everywhere. His horse screams and rears. Here's the thing about Sickles, though. Even in this moment, he's thinking about his reputation. As his men carry him to the rear on a stretcher, he props himself up on one elbow and lights a cigar. Puffs on it calmly while his leg dangles useless below him. He wants the troops to see him acting brave. He wants the story to be about his courage, not his mistake. The surgeons take his leg off that afternoon. Above the knee, because the damage is too bad to save anything below it. Sickles is awake for part of it, drifting in and out on chloroform and whiskey. But here's the wild part. After they cut off his leg, Sickles doesn't throw it away. He has it preserved, packed in a little coffin-shaped box, and he donates it to the Army Medical Museum in Washington. For years afterward, he visits it, his own leg sitting in a glass case. He brings friends to see it. Once he brought Mark Twain, who later wrote that Sickles seemed to value the lost leg more than the one he still had. You can still see it today, by the way. Daniel Sickles' leg bones, right there in the National Museum of Health and Medicine, sitting next to a cannonball just like the one that took it off, most popular exhibit in the place. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. It's still July 2nd, and Sickles' leg is the least of the Union's problems, with the Third Corps collapsing, with Sickles himself being carried off the field, with Confederate troops pouring through the gaps in the line. Everything depends on what happens next at a rocky little hill called Little Roundtop. And right now, Little Roundtop is almost empty. See, when Sickles moved forward, he didn't leave anyone to guard the hills behind him. Little Roundtop, the key to the whole Union position, has maybe a handful of signal officers on top, and that's it. If the Confederates take that hill, they can roll up the entire Union line from behind. Every soldier on Cemetery Ridge caught in a crossfire, the army destroyed, the war possibly lost. A Union engineer named Governor Warren rides up to Little Roundtop to check on the signal station. He's just doing his job, making sure communications are working. But when he reaches the top and looks south, his stomach drops. Confederate infantry. Thousands of them. Moving through the woods toward the undefended hill, Warren starts screaming for help, sending messengers in every direction, begging, demanding anyone with troops to spare. We need men on this hill right now or we're all dead. The 1st Brigade to respond belongs to a colonel named Strong Vincent. Young guy, 26 years old, lawyer from Pennsylvania. He doesn't wait for orders to come down the chain of command. He just turns his men toward the hill and starts running. Vincent gets 4 regiments up onto Little Roundtop maybe 10 minutes before the Confederates arrive. 10 minutes. That's the margin between holding the position and catastrophe. He spreads his men out along the rocky slopes, the 16th Michigan on the right, 44th New York and 83rd Pennsylvania in the middle, and on the far left, holding the most exposed position of all, a regiment from about as far from Pennsylvania as you can get and still be in the Union. The 20th Maine, 386 men from the fishing villages and logging camps of America's northeastern corner. Their commander is a 34-year-old college professor named Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. Before the war, he taught rhetoric at Bowdoin College, languages, literature. He spoke 7 languages, actually. Could read Homer in the original Greek. Now he's standing on a rocky hillside in Pennsylvania, watching Confederate soldiers in butternut and grey forming up in the woods below, and Colonel Vincent is giving him the simplest, most terrifying order of his life. Hold this ground at all costs, the far left of the Union line. If the Confederates get past Chamberlain, they're behind the whole army. Everything depends on these 386 men from Maine, holding a pile of rocks against whatever's coming up that hill. Chamberlain looks at his men. Farmers, fishermen, lumberjacks. Most of them have been in the army less than a year. Some of them were imprisoned 2 weeks ago, mutineers from another Maine regiment who were given a choice: join the 20th or face the firing squad. These are the men who are supposed to save the Union Army. Chamberlain positions them behind the rocks and fallen trees, tells them to hold their fire until the Confederates are close, tells them not to run no matter what. And then the Alabamians come, the 15th Alabama, veterans, hard men from the cotton country, led by a colonel named William Oates, who's marched them 25 miles today without water. They're exhausted, thirsty, angry, but they're coming. They come up that hill screaming the rebel yell, that high, haunting sound that Union soldiers learned to dread. Not a human yell exactly, something wilder, something that reaches down into your guts and squeezes. The main men hold their fire. Wait, wait. The Alabamians are 50 yards away. 40, 30. Fire. The volley rips into the Confederate line. Men fall, but the ones behind keep coming, climbing over the bodies of their friends, and now it's close fighting. Rifle to rifle, bayonet to bayonet, men grabbing each other's throats in the smoke. The Confederates fall back, regroup, come again, and again, and again. 5 times the Alabamians charge up that hill. 5 times the main men throw them back, but each charge takes its toll. Chamberlain's line is getting thinner. Men are running out of ammunition. Some are down to their last few rounds. Some have nothing left at all. Chamberlain looks down the hill at the Confederates regrouping for another charge. He looks at his exhausted men, their faces black with powder smoke, their hands shaking. He does the math in his head. They can't hold another charge. They don't have the bullets. They don't have the men. But they can't retreat either. There's nobody behind them. If they run, the whole army dies. Chamberlain makes a decision that sounds insane. The kind of decision that only makes sense when every other option is worse. Fix bayonets. The men look at him like he's lost his mind. They've got no ammunition. The enemy outnumbers them, and he wants them to charge. But they do it. They fix those long steel blades onto their empty rifles. They stand up from behind their rocks, and when Chamberlain yells the order, they go screaming down that hill straight at the Confederate line. The thing about a bayonet charge is that it shouldn't work. You're running at men who have loaded rifles. They can shoot you before you ever get close. The math doesn't add up. It's suicide with extra steps. But here's what the math doesn't account for: psychology. When you see 300 screaming men coming at you with 18 inches of steel pointed at your chest, something happens in your brain. Something old. Something from before humans had words. Every instinct you have says run. The Alabamians see the main men coming down that hill. They've already charged up it 5 times. They're exhausted, thirsty. Their officers are dead or wounded. And now these Yankees who should be retreating, who should be beaten, are attacking instead. The Confederate line wavers. Then it breaks. Men turn and run. Others throw down their rifles and put their hands up. The main soldiers crash into what's left of the Confederate formation, like a wave hitting a sand castle. Chamberlain is right there in the middle of it, his sword in one hand, a pistol he grabbed off a wounded Confederate officer in the other. A rebel officer aims a pistol point blank at Chamberlain's face, pulls the trigger. The gun misfires. Chamberlain knocks it aside with his sword and the officer surrenders on the spot. The charge sweeps down the hill, around the base of Big Roundtop, scooping up prisoners as it goes. By the time it's over, the 20th Maine has captured more men than they have left standing. They've also saved the Union left flank. Saved, maybe, the entire army. Chamberlain will get the Medal of Honor for this. He'll go on to be wounded 6 times during the war, once so badly that they publish his obituary in the newspapers. He survives anyway, becomes governor of Maine, president of Bowdoin College, lives until 1914, dying at 85 from complications of that wound at Petersburg 50 years earlier. But right now, in the smoke and chaos of Little Roundtop, he's just a professor with a bloody sword trying to figure out what just happened. His brother Tom is somewhere in the chaos too. Chamberlain brought his younger brother into the regiment as a lieutenant. All through the charge he'd been terrified that he'd find Tom lying dead among the rocks. When they finally find each other in the aftermath, neither of them can speak for a minute. They just stand there, covered in dirt and powder smoke, alive against all odds. Around them, the hillside looks like the end of the world. Bodies everywhere, blue and grey mixed together. Wounded men calling out for water, for help, for their mothers. The main soldiers who can still walk are collecting prisoners, grabbing dropped rifles, trying to figure out how many of their friends are still breathing. The fighting on Little Roundtop isn't quite over yet. On the right side of the hill, the Texans are still pressing hard. Strong Vincent, the young colonel who got his men to the hill just in time, takes a bullet in the groin. He'll die 5 days later, promoted to brigadier general on his deathbed. More Union reinforcements pour onto the hill, fresh regiments who crash into the exhausted Texans and finally push them back. By nightfall, Little Roundtop belongs to the Union. It will stay that way, but the battle isn't over, not even close. While Chamberlain and his men were fighting for their lives on that rocky hillside, the rest of Day 2 was going badly wrong. The wheat field has turned into a slaughter pen. Back and forth, back and forth. Union troops push forward, take the field, get hit on the flanks, fall back. Confederate troops sweep in, hold it for a few minutes, get counterattacked, retreat. 6 times this happens. The wheat is gone now, trampled into a reddish-brown mud that used to be soil and is now something else. A single regiment from Maine, the 17th, finds itself holding a low stone wall on a small rise at the edge of the field. They're supposed to retreat with everyone else, but their commander tells them to hold, so they hold. Volley after volley into the advancing Confederates, men falling all around them, but still they hold. Until the order comes to withdraw, and they have to leave that wall to someone else. The Confederates take it, then lose it again an hour later. The same ground, fought over and over, soaked in blood that will take years to wash away. In the peach orchard, what's left of Sickles' cause is falling apart. With their general gone, with their line exposed on 3 sides, the men fight and die and fall back, fight and die and fall back. The peach trees are shattered stumps now. The orchard wall is piled with bodies. A Confederate general named Barksdale leads his Mississippi Brigade straight into the heart of the Union position. He's a wild-looking man, long white hair streaming behind him as he rides. He's so far ahead of his men that he reaches the Union guns before anyone else, practically daring them to shoot him. They do. Barksdale goes down with wounds in both legs and his chest. His men carry him to a farmhouse where he dies the next morning, but his charge has ripped a hole in the Union center. For about 30 minutes there's nothing between the Confederates and the crest of Cemetery Ridge, except a few scattered artillery crews and a handful of staff officers. If the rebels can push through now, right now, they'll be behind the whole Union army. General Winfield Scott Hancock sees the danger. Hancock is the commander of the 2nd Corps, one of the best generals the Union has. Tall, handsome, the kind of officer who looks like a statue of himself. Men call him Hancock the Superb, and for once the nickname isn't a joke. He's been everywhere today, riding back and forth along the line, plugging gaps, rallying broken units, grabbing colonels by the collar and personally pointing them where to go. His white shirt is soaked with sweat and spattered with other men's blood. His voice is going hoarse from shouting. Hancock needs troops, any troops. He sees a regiment nearby, the 1st Minnesota, and rides over to them. They've got maybe 260 men left. The colonel looks up at Hancock, waiting for orders. Hancock points at the Confederate line coming toward them. A full brigade, probably 5 times their number, maybe more. "Do you see those colours?" Hancock shouts. "Take them." The colonel doesn't argue, doesn't hesitate. He turns to his men and gives the order. Forward. The 1st Minnesota charges. 260 men against over 1,000. They don't have any illusions about winning. They know exactly what they're doing. They're buying time with their lives. They slam into the Confederate advance and just stop it. For 5 critical minutes, they hold the entire rebel assault in place. Men falling all around them, the line getting thinner and thinner, but they keep fighting, keep holding. When it's over, the 1st Minnesota has suffered 82% casualties, the highest loss of any Union regiment in a single engagement during the entire war. But the line holds. The Confederates fall back. Meanwhile, on the other end of the battlefield, things are getting desperate in a different way. Culp's Hill anchors the right side of the Union line. It's a steep, rocky, heavily wooded hill, the kind of terrain where attacking is a nightmare. The Union had most of the 12th Corps dug in up there, nice and secure. But then Meade started pulling troops away to shore up the collapsing left flank. Sickles' mess required everyone with a rifle to come help, and that included most of the men on Culp's Hill. By evening, there's only 1 brigade left up there. 1,400 men under a general named George Greene. Greene is 62 years old, a civil engineer by training, one of the guys who helped build the Croton Reservoir that gives New York City its drinking water. He's been in the army since West Point, class of 1823. That makes him the oldest general on either side at Gettysburg, and he's about to face 3 Confederate brigades, maybe 4,000 men, coming up the hill at him in the fading light. But Greene has done something smart. All day, while other units rested or moved around, Greene had his men building fortifications, trenches, log walls, stone breastworks. The other commanders thought he was being paranoid. Waste of energy. The rebels aren't coming to this side of the field. Turns out Greene wasn't paranoid. He was right. The Confederates come crashing through the woods as the sun goes down. They hit Greene's line and get thrown back. Hit it again. Thrown back again. The fortifications Greene built are saving his men's lives, letting 1,400 hold off 3 times their number. The fighting goes on for hours in the darkness. Muzzle flashes lighting up the trees like lightning. Men shooting at sounds, at shadows. 1 Confederate regiment actually gets into the empty trenches on the lower part of the hill, the ones abandoned when the other Union troops left. But they can't push any further. Greene's line holds. While Culp's Hill burns, another Confederate assault hits Cemetery Hill itself. 2 brigades of Louisiana and North Carolina troops climbing the steep slopes, fighting through a cemetery where the headstones become cover, then obstacles, then nothing as they're smashed by artillery. Some Confederate soldiers actually reach the Union guns at the top. For a few chaotic minutes there's hand-to-hand fighting around the cannons, gunners swinging rammers and handspikes like clubs, infantry using rifles as bludgeons because there's no time to reload. Then Union reinforcements arrive and push the Confederates back down the hill. The attack fails. Cemetery Hill stays Union. As night falls on July 2nd, both armies are exhausted, broken. The Union has lost around 10,000 men today. Dead, wounded, captured, missing. The 3rd Corps barely exists anymore. Units that started the day with 500 men are down to 50. Surgeons are working by lantern light in farmhouses and barns, their floors slick with blood, their sores never resting. The Confederates have lost maybe 7,000. Less than the Union, but they can afford it even less. Lee's army is far from home, running low on everything. Every man lost is a man who can't be replaced. Robert E. Lee sits in his headquarters tent that night thinking. His attacks have failed. The Union flanks held. His army has bled itself against those hills and ridges and gained almost nothing. A reasonable man might consider retreat. might accept that this battle is lost and live to fight another day. Lee is not feeling reasonable. He's convinced that the Union army is as broken as his own, that one more push, one more big attack will crack them open. He's wrong about this, but he doesn't know it. Lee decides to attack again tomorrow. Not the flanks this time, the centre. He'll gather every fresh soldier he has, line them up, and send them straight at the middle of the Union line on Cemetery Ridge. Longstreet hates this plan even more than he hated yesterday's. He argues, he practically begs. This is exactly the kind of frontal assault that gets armies destroyed. The Union position is too strong. The ground is too open. Lee listens politely, then gives the order anyway. Tomorrow, 12,000 Confederate soldiers will march across 3/4 of a mile of the open farmland, directly into the guns of the Union Army. It will be called Pickett's Charge, and it will be the most famous infantry assault in American history. But that's tomorrow. Tonight, in Gettysburg, the townspeople are living a nightmare. The fighting has moved past them for now, but the aftermath is everywhere. Churches are hospitals. Homes are hospitals. The courthouse, the schools, any building with walls and a roof has wounded men packed into it, lying on floors, on pews, on tables, on each other. The smell is indescribable. Gunpowder, blood, the particular sweetness of wounds going bad in the July heat. Cornelia Hancock, a 23-year-old nurse who's come to help from New Jersey, writes that the smell is so thick she feels like it might kill her, like it's a physical force pressing down on her chest. She's supposed to be a delicate young woman. That's what her family thinks. That's what society says. But she's here anyway, wading through the horror, holding hands with dying boys, writing letters home for men who can't hold a pen anymore. Years later, she'll say that the stench of Gettysburg stayed with her for the rest of her life, that she could never quite forget it, that sometimes, even decades later, she'd catch a smell that brought her right back to those blood-soaked floors. Surgeons work until they collapse, then get up and work some more. There aren't enough bandages, enough chloroform, enough of anything. The amputation tables never stop. Outside the surgical tents, piles of arms and legs grow taller as the night goes on. Men scream for water, for their mothers, for someone to please just make it stop. And somewhere in the chaos, in a little brick house on Baltimore Street, Jenny Wade is still alive. She's been baking bread for the Union soldiers. All day, while the battle raged on the hill south of town, she's been kneading dough, stoking the fire, pulling loaves from the oven. Her sister's baby cries. Artillery rumbles in the distance. More than 150 bullets have hit the house already, punching through the walls, but somehow none of them have hit anyone inside. Tomorrow morning Jenny will wake up early. She'll start making bread again, because the soldiers need to eat, and this is what she can do to help. She doesn't know that in a few hours a single stray bullet will find its way through 2 closed doors and into her heart, that she'll die instantly, the only civilian killed in the Battle of Gettysburg, her hands still covered in flour. She doesn't know that her fiancé Jack, wounded in a battle 2 weeks ago in Virginia, is already dying in a Confederate hospital, that neither of them will ever learn what happened to the other. Right now she's just a 20-year-old woman in a brick house, waiting for morning, like everyone else in Gettysburg. Outside the stars are hidden by smoke. The fields are covered with bodies the stretcher-bearers haven't reached yet. Men cry out in the darkness, begging for help that isn't coming. And on Cemetery Ridge, Union soldiers dig deeper into the rocky ground, piling up stones and fence rails, preparing for whatever tomorrow brings. They can feel it coming. Something big. Something final. None of them sleep well tonight. July 3rd dawns grey and humid. Mist hangs in the low places, pooling in the valleys between the ridges. The sun isn't even fully up when the guns start again. On Culp's Hill, the Confederates who grabbed those abandoned trenches last night are still there. They've spent the dark hours digging in, waiting for reinforcements, expecting to push forward at first light and roll up the Union right flank. What they don't know is that the Union troops who left those trenches yesterday have come back. The 12th Corps is home again, and they want their hill back. At 4:30 in the morning, Union artillery opens up on the Confederate positions. The shells come crashing down through the trees, exploding among the rocks, turning the wooded hillside into a storm of splinters and shrapnel. Then the infantry goes in. For the next 7 hours, Culp's Hill becomes a meat grinder. The terrain is impossible. Steep slopes covered in boulders, trees so thick you can barely see 20 yards. The Confederates are dug in behind the very fortifications the Union built, which means the Union troops are now attacking their own defences. The irony is not lost on anyone. Wave after wave of blue-coated soldiers charge up that hill. Wave after wave gets thrown back. The Confederate rifles crack from behind the logs and stones, and men fall, and more men step over their bodies to keep climbing. It's not tactics anymore, it's just endurance. Who can take more punishment? By 11 in the morning it's over. The Confederates have been pushed off Culp's Hill entirely. They've lost maybe 2,000 men, the Union has lost about 1,000. But more importantly, the Union right flank is secure. Lee's last chance to turn that end of the line has failed, and while all this is happening, in a brick house on Baltimore Street, a young woman is making breakfast. Jenny Wade woke up early, like she always does. There's bread to bake. The soldiers need to eat. She's been doing this for 2 days now, mixing flour and water and salt, kneading the dough until her arms ache, feeding it into the oven batch after batch. Her sister Georgia is upstairs with the baby, little Louis Kenneth McClellan, barely a week old, born right before the battle started. The baby's father is off fighting somewhere. Georgia can barely walk, still recovering from the birth, so Jenny does everything, fetches water, tends the fire, changes the baby, bakes the bread. The house has taken a beating. Bullets have punched through the walls, the doors, the window frames. Yesterday a shell crashed through the roof and lodged in the attic without exploding. They're lucky to be alive and they know it. But the fighting has moved away from them. The main battle is south of town now, on those ridges and hills. Baltimore Street is quiet this morning, almost peaceful. Around 8:30 Jenny is in the kitchen, kneading dough for another batch of biscuits. Her hands work the soft mass automatically, pressing and folding, pressing and folding. Maybe she's thinking about Jack, her fiancé, wondering where he is, when she'll see him again. Maybe she's thinking about the future they'd planned. A little house somewhere, children, growing old together. Or maybe she's just thinking about how tired she is, how her back aches, how she'd give anything for one quiet night of sleep without the sound of guns. She doesn't hear the shot, a Confederate sharpshooter, somewhere north of the house, probably in a building or a tree, fires at a target he can't even see clearly. Maybe he's aiming at a Union soldier in the street. Maybe he just sees movement through a window. We'll never know who he was or what he thought he was shooting at. The bullet punches through the outer door of the house, keeps going, through the inner door of the kitchen. It hits Jenny Wade in the back, passes through her shoulder blade, tears through her heart, and lodges in her corset. She falls without a sound, her hands still in the dough. Her mother in the next room hears the thump, comes running, finds her daughter on the floor, the dough still clinging to her fingers, blood pooling on the wooden boards. Jenny Wade is dead at 20 years old, the only civilian killed in the Battle of Gettysburg. Union soldiers stationed nearby hear the screaming. They come to help, but there's nothing anyone can do. They carry her body down to the cellar, away from the windows, away from any more stray bullets. Someone finds a coffin that was meant for a Confederate officer killed the day before. They put Jenny in it instead. Her mother finishes baking the bread. What else can she do? Her daughter is dead. The soldiers still need to eat. She pulls the biscuits from the oven and hands them out to the young men in blue who file past the house. Jenny never learns what happened to Jack, and Jack, dying slowly in a Confederate field hospital from wounds he took 2 weeks earlier at Winchester, never learns what happened to Jenny. He passes away 9 days after she does, still believing she's home in Gettysburg waiting for him. They're buried near each other now in Evergreen Cemetery. 2 graves with permission to fly the American flag 24 hours a day. The only 2 in that cemetery with that honour. But that's later. Right now it's still the morning of July 3rd, and the battle is about to reach its climax. Out to the east of Gettysburg, about 3 miles from the main battlefield, another fight is developing. Confederate cavalry under Jeb Stuart has finally arrived. Stuart is supposed to be the eyes of Lee's army. He's supposed to scout ahead, find the enemy, report back. Instead, he's been riding around the Union Army for a week, capturing wagons, making headlines, being Jeb Stuart. By the time he shows up at Gettysburg, the battle is already 2 days old, and Lee has been fighting blind. Lee has a mission for Stuart now, though. While the main infantry assault hits the Union center, Stuart will swing around behind the Union Army and attack from the east, catch them between 2 fires, panic and confusion. That's the plan. But there's a Union cavalry division waiting for him. General David Gregg has maybe 5,000 troopers positioned on the farm fields east of town. When Stuart's men come riding out of the tree line, Gregg is ready. What happens next is one of the largest cavalry battles of the entire war. Horsemen slam into each other at full gallop. The crash of impact sounds like nothing else, like 1,000 trees falling at once. Sabres flash in the midday sun. Pistols bark at point-blank range. Men are knocked from their saddles, trampled under hooves hacked at with 3 feet of sharpened steel. It's medieval warfare with slightly better technology. The horses are screaming, rearing, biting at each other. Men fight stirrup to stirrup, so close they can see the whites of each other's eyes, the sweat on each other's faces. A cavalryman from Michigan later writes that he could smell his opponent's breath in the instant before their sabres met. A young Union general named George Armstrong Custer leads a charge straight into the Confederate center. You might know that name. 20 years from now, he'll make a very different kind of charge at a place called Little Bighorn, and it won't go nearly as well. But today, at Gettysburg, he's 23 years old with long, golden hair streaming behind him as he screams, "Come on, you Wolverines!" and crashes into the rebel horsemen. The cavalry battle seesaws back and forth for over an hour, charge and countercharge. Neither side can break the other. Finally, Stuart pulls back. He's failed. The Union rear is secure. Lee's plan to attack from 2 directions has fallen apart. And now, back on the main battlefield, Robert E. Lee plays his last card. It's a little after 1 in the afternoon. The fighting at Culp's Hill is over. The cavalry battle to the east is winding down. An eerie quiet settles over the field. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl because you know something terrible is coming. Confederate artillerymen have been positioning their guns all morning. Over 150 cannon lined up along Seminary Ridge, all aimed at the center of the Union line on Cemetery Ridge. It's the largest concentration of artillery in the history of North American warfare. At 1:07, 2 signal guns fire, and then the world explodes. Every Confederate cannon opens up at once. The noise is beyond description, beyond anything these soldiers have experienced in 2 years of war. Witnesses later say you couldn't hear yourself think, couldn't hear the man next to you screaming, even if his mouth was an inch from your ear. The ground shakes like an earthquake, a constant rolling tremor that rattles your teeth and makes your vision blur. The air fills with smoke so thick that gunners can't see their own barrels. They're loading and firing by feel now, by rhythm, by the muscle memory of 1,000 practice rounds. Ram the charge, set the shell, step back, fire, do it again, do it again, do it again. The shells come howling across the valley, trailing fire and smoke. They slam into Cemetery Ridge, into the trees, into the stone walls, into the men huddled behind them. Explosions everywhere. Dirt and rock and body parts flying. Horses screaming, that terrible high-pitched sound that haunts men for the rest of their lives. Men screaming too. Hell itself opening up on that Pennsylvania hillside. The Union gunners fire back, 80 cannon against 150. The two ridges pound at each other across a mile of open farmland. Shells pass each other in mid-air. The smoke rises so high it blocks out the sun, turning midday into a strange yellow twilight. On Cemetery Ridge, Union soldiers press themselves into the earth. They dig their fingers into the dirt. They pray. They curse. Some of them just lie there with their eyes closed, waiting to find out if the next shell has their name on it. A soldier from Pennsylvania later writes that he'd never felt so helpless in his life. At least in a firefight you can shoot back. You can do something. Under an artillery barrage you just have to take it. Lie there and take it and hope. General Hancock rides along the line, calm as if he's on a Sunday stroll. His staff begs him to dismount to take cover. A corps commander is too valuable to lose to a random shell. Hancock ignores them. His men need to see him, need to know their general isn't afraid. A shell explodes near him, killing his horse. Hancock gets up, dusts himself off, and finds another horse. Keeps riding. The barrage goes on for almost 2 hours. 2 hours of constant, unrelenting destruction. When it finally stops, the silence is almost as shocking as the noise was. Union soldiers lift their heads, look around. The ridge is cratered and smoking, but the line is still there. The stone walls are still there. The men behind them, most of them anyway, are still there. Here's the thing about the Confederate artillery barrage. It mostly missed. The smoke was so thick that the Confederate gunners couldn't see where their shells were landing. They fired too high. Most of their shots sailed over Cemetery Ridge and exploded in the rear areas, hitting supply wagons and artillery limbers and field hospitals instead of the men on the front line. The Union artillery has also gone quiet, but not because it's been destroyed. General Henry Hunt, the Union artillery commander, has ordered his guns to stop firing. He wants to save ammunition. He wants the Confederates to think they've knocked out the Union cannons. It works. Confederate officers peer through the smoke and see that the Union guns have stopped shooting. They assume the barrage has done its job. The way is clear. Across the valley on Seminary Ridge, 12,000 Confederate soldiers are standing in formation. They've been waiting in the woods all morning, sweating in the July heat, listening to the artillery duel, knowing what comes next. 3 divisions, Pickett's Virginians, Pettigrew's North, Carolinians, Trimble's men from several states. Some of them are veterans who've been fighting since First Bull Run. Some of them are raw recruits who've never fired a shot in anger. They've been writing letters all morning, to wives, to mothers, to sweethearts back home. Some of them hand the letters to friends in other units, the ones who aren't making the charge. If I don't come back, make sure she gets this. A sergeant from Virginia looks across that open field and turns to the man next to him. We're not all going to make it across there. I know, the other man says. They shake hands. Don't say anything else. What else is there to say? They all know what they're about to do. They can see that open field stretching out before them. 3/4 of a mile of farmland with no cover, not a tree or a ditch or anything to hide behind, and at the far end the Union Army waiting for them with loaded rifles and shotted cannon. General George Pickett, whose name this charge will carry forever, rides along his division. He's 40 years old with long perfumed hair and a carefully waxed moustache. A dandy, a romantic. The kind of man who writes love letters to his young wife every single night. "Remember old Virginia," he shouts to his men. "Remember old Virginia." General James Longstreet watches from a fence rail. He still thinks this is a terrible idea. He's been arguing against it all morning. When Pickett rides up and asks if he should begin the advance, Longstreet can't bring himself to give the order out loud. He just nods, can't speak, can't say the words that will send these men to their deaths. Pickett salutes. "I am going to move forward, sir." At around 3 in the afternoon, 12,000 men step out of the tree line and start walking towards Cemetery Ridge. Not running, walking. Parade ground formation, flags flying, officers on horseback, a mile-wide wave of butternut and grey flowing across the Pennsylvania farmland. From the Union position, it looks like nothing real, like something out of a painting. One soldier later says it was the most beautiful and terrible thing he ever saw. The Confederate officers shout commands, "Dress the line, close up, keep moving." And then the Union artillery, which isn't destroyed at all, opens fire. The first shells hit before they've gone 100 yards. The Union guns that everyone thought were destroyed come roaring back to life. Solid shot, exploding shells. They tear into the Confederate ranks like a giant scythe, cutting down 5, 10, 20 men at a time. Whole sections of the line simply disappear in clouds of red mist and flying dirt. A shell bounces once, twice, 3 times across the grass before ploughing through a company of Virginians. The men behind them can see exactly where it went by the trail of bodies it left. But the line keeps moving. "Close up! Close up!" The officers are shouting, their voices barely audible over the thunder of the guns. Men step over. The bodies of their friends fill in the gaps, keep walking. That's the training. That's the discipline beaten into them over 2 years of war. Close up and keep moving. Don't look down. Don't think about who just fell. Close up and keep moving. A private from Virginia, 19 years old, a farmer's son who enlisted because his older brother did, watches the man next to him get hit by a shell fragment. 1 second they're walking side by side, close enough to touch. The next second there's just a spray of blood and a sound like wet cloth tearing, and the private is alone, still walking, his uniform spattered with something he doesn't want to think about. The distance is impossible. 3/4 of a mile, 1,500 yards. In peacetime you could walk it in 15 minutes without breaking a sweat. Under artillery fire every step takes forever. Every step might be your last. The ground is uneven, fences to climb over, a road to cross. The Emmitsburg Road runs right through the middle of the field, lined with wooden fences on both sides. The Confederate soldiers have to stop, climb over, reform their lines, keep going. All while the shells keep falling. At the fences, men bunch up. They can't help it. They're trying to climb, trying to keep their rifles, trying to stay alive. And bunched up men make easy targets. The Union gunners see the crowds at the fences and adjust their aim. The shells crash down into knots of soldiers, scattering bodies like leaves. A colonel from North Carolina takes a shell fragment to the chest and goes down. His men keep moving. A major picks up the regiment's flag when the colour bearer falls. The major goes down 30 seconds later. Another man grabs the flag, then another, then another. The flag keeps moving forward even as the men carrying it die. Halfway across the field, the formation starts to come apart. Not because the men are running. They're not. They're still walking, still trying to close up, still heading toward that stone wall on the ridge. But there are so many dead now, so many gaps. The neat lines that stepped out of the woods are becoming a ragged mass of survivors, and now the Union infantry opens up. The men behind that stone wall have been waiting, watching. They've seen this wave of grey and butternut coming toward them for 10 minutes, getting closer and closer. Now, at maybe 300 yards, they stand up and fire. The volley rips into the Confederate front rank. Men crumple, men spin, men fall backward like they've been shoved by an invisible hand. The smoke from 10,000 rifles billows up, mixing with the artillery smoke, turning the whole field into a grey-white fog lit by muzzle flashes. The Confederates fire back. They're supposed to save their ammunition for close range, but some of them can't help it. They stop, aim, fire into the smoke, reload, keep moving. The exchange of volleys becomes constant, a crackling roar that never stops. On the Union side, Asa Stissam, soldier from Pennsylvania, peers through the smoke and can't believe what he's seeing. The Confederates are still coming. He's watched hundreds of them fall. The ground in front of the wall is carpeted with bodies, and still they keep coming. "Why won't they stop?" he says to no one in particular. "Why won't they stop?" At 200 yards, the Union artillery switches to canister. Canister is basically a giant shotgun shell, a tin can packed with iron balls. When it fires, the can rips apart and sends dozens of balls spraying out in a cone of death. At close range, it can cut down an entire rank of soldiers with a single shot. The Confederate line dissolves. Men who've been marching shoulder to shoulder suddenly find themselves alone, everyone around them dead or wounded. They keep moving anyway. What else can they do? They can't go back. They can't stand still. The only way out is through. A general named Lewis Armistead is leading the charge on the left side of Pickett's division. He's 56 years old, a career soldier, one of the best officers in the Confederate Army. Before the war, his closest friend was a Union officer named Winfield Hancock, the same Hancock who's commanding the Union troops right in front of him now. The two men had served together in California, been to each other's homes, drunk together, laughed together, shared the kind of friendship that only soldiers understand. When the war came and they had to choose sides, Armistead wept. The night before he left to join the Confederacy, he told Hancock's wife that if he ever raised his hand against her husband, may God strike him dead. Now he's walking toward his old friend's position, his black hat on the tip of his sword, raised high so his men can see him in the smoke. "Follow me, follow me." He doesn't know if Hancock is still alive, doesn't know if he'll have to kill him or be killed by him. He just knows he has to keep moving forward. "Come on, boys," he shouts. "Give them the cold steel." The survivors of the charge, maybe a few hundred men from what started as thousands, surge forward behind Armistead. They hit the stone wall, they climb over it. For one impossible moment, Confederate soldiers are standing on Union ground, behind the Union line, inside the Union position. This is it. This is the high water mark of the Confederacy. Right here, at a little curve in a stone wall that people will later call the Angle. This is as far as the Confederate States of America will ever get. Armistead reaches a Union cannon. He puts his hand on it, claiming it. Around him, his men are fighting hand-to-hand with Union soldiers. Bayonets, rifle butts, fists. It's chaos. Pure animal combat. And then Armistead goes down, shot in the chest, maybe more than once. He falls near the cannon, still holding his sword with a hat on it. Union soldiers gather around him. Someone recognizes him. Word spreads that a Confederate general is down. Armistead is still conscious when they reach him. He asks them to find Hancock. Tell Hancock that Armistead is sorry, that he's dying, that he sends his love. They can't bring Hancock. Hancock has been shot too, hit in the thigh by a bullet and a bent nail that was driven into him by the impact. He's being carried to the rear, bleeding badly, giving orders the whole way. He'll survive, barely. Armistead won't. He dies 2 days later without ever seeing his friend again. At the wall, the Confederate breakthrough is collapsing. Union reinforcements are pouring in from both sides. Fresh regiments that weren't in the initial line. They hit the Confederates from the flanks, from behind. The few hundred rebels who made it over the wall are now surrounded, trapped. Some fight to the death. Some surrender. Some try to run back across that terrible field, only to be cut down before they've gone 20 steps. A Confederate sergeant later remembers looking around and realizing that everyone he came with is gone, dead or wounded or captured. He's standing alone behind a stone wall surrounded by Union soldiers pointing rifles at him. He raises his hands. The charge is over. It's lasted maybe an hour from start to finish. In that hour, the Confederacy has lost over 6,000 men. Killed, wounded, captured, missing. More than half of everyone who stepped out of those woods. The survivors stumble back across the field, walking through the wreckage of their army. Dead men everywhere. Wounded men crying for help. Abandoned rifles, broken flags, scattered equipment. The ground is so thick with bodies in some places that you can't walk without stepping on them. George Pickett rides forward to meet the returning troops. His perfect hair is wild now. His face is streaked with tears and gunpowder. He's been watching the whole thing, watching his division, his beautiful Virginia division, get torn apart on that open field. Robert E. Lee rides up to him. The old general's face is grey. He looks 10 years older than he did this morning. "General Pickett," Lee says, "you must rally your division." Pickett stares at him. His voice breaks when he answers, "General Lee, I have no division." It's true. Of the roughly 5,000 men Pickett led into that charge, barely half have come back. His 3 brigade commanders are all casualties. 2 dead, 1 wounded. 15 regimental commanders, all casualties. The division that was the pride of Virginia has ceased to exist as a fighting force. Lee rides among the survivors, trying to rally them, trying to prepare for a Union counterattack that he's sure is coming. He keeps saying the same thing, over and over, to every soldier he meets. "This was all my fault. This was all my fault." The counterattack never comes. The Union army is too exhausted, too bloodied, too stunned by what they've just seen. They hold their lines and watch the Confederates retreat, but they don't pursue. Nobody has the strength for more killing today. As the afternoon fades into evening, an informal truce settles over the battlefield. Men from both sides creep out to collect their wounded, to bring water to the dying, to find the bodies of their friends. Union and Confederate soldiers work side by side in some places, too tired to hate each other anymore. A Union soldier shares his canteen with a wounded Confederate. A rebel helps a Yankee bandage a wound. They don't talk much. What is there to say? They're all just boys, really. Boys who've seen too much. Boys who want to go home. The field between the ridges is a carpet of dead and dying men. Some of them will lie there all night, crying for help that doesn't come. The stretcher bearers can't reach everyone. There are too many. Always too many. In the Confederate camp on Seminary Ridge, what's left of the army tries to reorganize. Lee is planning the retreat. They'll leave tomorrow night, under cover of darkness, heading back toward Virginia. The invasion is over. The great gamble has failed. Pickett won't speak to Lee for the rest of the war. Some say he never forgave the old man for ordering that charge. Years later, when someone asks Pickett why the Confederacy lost at Gettysburg, he gives a simple answer. I've always thought the Yankees had something to do with it. But that's later. Right now, as darkness falls on July 3rd, 1863, nobody's making jokes. The smoke is clearing, the guns are silent, and 35,000 Americans are dead, wounded, or missing. The Battle of Gettysburg is over, except it isn't really. Not for the people who were there, not for the families who'll get the letters, not for the town of Gettysburg, which will spend the next months burying the dead and caring for the wounded and trying to figure out how to go back to normal when normal doesn't exist anymore. The stench will linger for months. The stain on the fields will take years to fade. Some of the farmers will never plant those fields again. Can't bring themselves to turn soil that's mixed with so much blood and bone. In the Union camp, soldiers are writing letters home, still alive, made it through. Some of them are shaking so badly they can barely hold the pen. Some of them will never be able to describe what they saw, not to anyone, not for the rest of their lives. General Hancock is in a field hospital, cursing out the surgeons who want to probe for the bullet in his leg. He'll keep that nail, the one that was driven into his thigh, as a souvenir. He'll carry it in his pocket for years. Joshua Chamberlain is still on Little Roundtop, looking out over the darkening valley, thinking about the men he lost. His brother Tom is nearby, alive, unhurt. That's something. That's more than a lot of brothers can say tonight. And somewhere in the ruins of what was Daniel Sickles' corps, in a hospital tent that smells like blood and chloroform, a box is being prepared. A small, coffin-shaped box. Inside it is a leg, carefully preserved, ready to be shipped to a museum in Washington. Because even in the middle of all this death, Daniel Sickles is thinking about how he wants to be remembered. The moon rises over Gettysburg. The screaming has mostly stopped now, replaced by moans and whimpers and the quiet sounds of men trying not to cry. Tomorrow there will be work to do, bodies to bury, wounded to transport, an army to retreat. But for now, for these few dark hours, the battle is truly over. The guns are cold, the flags are furled, and 50,000 families are about to get the worst news of their lives. July 4th, 1863, Independence Day. The irony isn't lost on anyone. 87 years ago, give or take, a group of men in Philadelphia declared that all men are created equal. Now, on the anniversary of that declaration, two armies sit facing each other across a field covered with the bodies of men who died, arguing about what those words actually mean. It rains, not a gentle summer shower, a downpour, the kind of rain that turns roads into rivers and fields into swamps. The water comes down in sheets, soaking the living and the dead alike, filling the shell craters, washing the blood into the earth. Robert E. Lee stands in his tent on Seminary Ridge, listening to the rain hammer against the canvas. He's been up all night, planning the retreat, writing orders, trying to figure out how to get his broken army back to Virginia before the Union destroys what's left of it. He's expecting an attack. Any competent commander would attack now, while the Confederates are reeling, while their ammunition is low and their morale is shattered. Lee has positioned his remaining troops in defensive lines, ready to receive the blow. The attack never comes. George Meade, the Union commander, is being careful. Too careful, some will say later. His army's exhausted too. He's lost over 20,000 men in 3 days. His corps commanders are telling him that the troops need rest, need reorganization, need time to absorb what they've just been through. So Meade waits, and Lee waits, and the rain keeps falling. In Washington, Abraham Lincoln is pacing. He's been getting telegrams from Gettysburg, fragmentary reports of a great battle, a Union victory, Lee's army in retreat. But he wants more. He wants to know that Meade is pursuing, that Lee won't escape, that this might finally be the end. "We had them within our grasp," Lincoln will write later, the frustration bleeding through every word. "We had only to stretch forth our hands, and they were ours." But Meade doesn't stretch forth his hands. Not yet. As darkness falls on July 4th, the Confederate retreat begins. It starts with the wounded, thousands upon thousands of them, loaded into wagons, onto ambulances, onto anything with wheels. The wagon train stretches 17 miles. 17 miles of broken men, jolting over rutted roads in the pouring rain, crying out with every bump and pothole. Think about that for a second. 17 miles. If you stood at one end, you couldn't see the other. It would take you 6 hours to walk from the front of the train to the back, and every foot of it is filled with men in agony. A Confederate doctor rides alongside the train trying to help where he can. There's not much he can do. No morphine left, no chloroform, barely any bandages. Just men with shattered limbs and torn bodies, lying in wagon beds that are slowly filling with rainwater, their blood mixing with the puddles. This screaming goes on for miles. Literally, for miles. Some of the wounded beg the drivers to stop, just for a minute, just for a second. Just let them catch their breath before the next jolt sends lightning through their wounds. The drivers can't stop, they have orders. Keep moving, get to Virginia. If they stop, the Union cavalry might catch them. If they stop, everyone dies. A soldier from Georgia, his leg amputated below the knee just hours ago, passes out from the pain every time the wagon hits a rock. Every time he wakes up, he thinks he's still on the battlefield, thinks he's still in the charge. His friends have to hold him down to keep him from climbing out of the wagon and trying to rejoin a fight that's already over. Another man, shot through both lungs and not expected to survive the night, somehow makes it all the way to Virginia. He lives another 40 years. Nobody can explain it. The doctors just shake their heads and call it a miracle. The rain doesn't stop. Behind the wagon train, the main body of Lee's army begins to move. They march at night to avoid Union observation, slogging through mud that sucks at their boots and swallows their wagon wheels. Men fall asleep while walking, stumble, pick themselves up, keep going. They're heading for the Potomac River, cross the Potomac, and they're back in Virginia, back in friendly territory, back where the Union army can't follow without launching another full invasion. But the Potomac has other ideas. The same rain that's turning the roads to mush has swollen the river to 3 times its normal depth. The fords that Lee's army used to cross into Pennsylvania are underwater. The pontoon bridge they left behind has been destroyed by Union raiders. There's no way across. Lee's army reaches the river and stops. They're trapped. 40,000 exhausted, demoralized men with their backs to an uncrossable river and a Union army somewhere behind them. This should be the end. By every rule of warfare, by every calculation of logic, the Army of Northern Virginia should cease to exist in the next few days. Caught against an impassable obstacle, outnumbered, outgunned, low on everything. The textbooks would call this a classic trap. For 10 days they wait. 10 days of digging fortifications in the mud. 10 days of watching the river, measuring its depth with sticks, praying for the water to fall. 10 days of short rations and wet clothes and wondering if tomorrow is the day the Union Army appears on the horizon to finish what they started. Soldiers write letters home. Some of them are farewell letters. If I don't make it, they write, know that I love you. Know that I died doing my duty. They fold the letters carefully and tuck them in their pockets, hoping someone will find them and mail them if the worst happens. Lee puts on a calm face. He rides among his men, projects confidence, acts like everything is going according to plan. But privately, he's preparing for the worst. He writes to Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president, warning him that the army might be destroyed. He makes plans for a last stand. And where is Meade during all this? Following, slowly, carefully. His army's marching south parallel to Lee's route, staying between the Confederates and Washington. He's not rushing. He's being methodical, professional, safe. Lincoln is losing his mind. Every day brings new telegrams. Lee is trapped at the river. Lee has no way to cross. Lee's army is ripe for destruction, and every day Meade finds a reason to wait. His troops are tired. The roads are bad. He needs to concentrate his forces. He needs more information about Confederate positions. If I had gone up there, I could have whipped them myself, Lincoln reportedly says. It's probably not true, but it captures his frustration perfectly. Finally, on July 12th, the Union Army approaches Lee's fortified position at Williamsport, Maryland. Meade calls a council of war. His corps commanders vote. The majority says wait. Don't attack fortified positions. Let's see what develops. Meade waits. That night the river finally drops enough to ford. Confederate engineers have also been building a makeshift pontoon bridge out of torn-down warehouses and whatever lumber they could find. It's rickety. It might collapse at any moment, but it's a bridge. Lee's army crosses in the darkness, the men wading through chest-deep water or shuffling across the swaying pontoons. By morning, almost everyone is across. The Army of Northern Virginia is back in Virginia, battered and bleeding but still alive. When Meade's troops finally advance on the Confederate position, they find empty trenches. Lee is gone. Lincoln, when he hears the news, is devastated. He writes Meade an angry letter, accusing him of letting the war's best chance for a quick end slip through his fingers. Then he puts the letter in a drawer and never sends it. What good would it do now? The war will go on for almost 2 more years. Hundreds of thousands more will die. And people will argue forever about whether Meade could have ended it right there, at that swollen river crossing. But that's the big picture. Let's go back to Gettysburg, back to the town that's now a graveyard. The armies are gone, but they've left everything behind. Bodies everywhere, in the fields, in the orchards, in the streets, piled behind stone walls and scattered across hillsides. The July heat is doing its work, and the smell is becoming unbearable. The townspeople don't know where to start. There are maybe 2,500 residents in Gettysburg. They've just hosted a battle involving 160,000 soldiers. The math doesn't work. They don't have the manpower, the coffins, the grave diggers, the anything to deal with this. Volunteers start arriving within days. Doctors, nurses, ordinary citizens who read about the battle in the newspapers and felt like they had to do something. They set up field hospitals in barns and churches and private homes. They organize burial details. They write letters for dying soldiers who can't hold a pen. A woman named Cornelia Hancock, the one we mentioned before, works 18-hour days in the hospitals. She's 23 years old, barely more than a girl, and she's up to her elbows in blood and pus and gangrene. Years later, she'll write that she was so tired she could have slept standing up. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the men she couldn't save. The dead are buried where they fell at first. Shallow graves marked with wooden boards, a name scratched in pencil if anyone knew it. Unknown if they didn't. Sometimes just a number. The fields around Gettysburg become a patchwork of little mounds and makeshift headstones. Burial details work around the clock in the summer heat, handkerchiefs tied over their faces against the smell. They find bodies in the strangest places, wedged in rock crevices on Little Roundtop, hidden in the tall wheat of the fields, floating in creeks and streams, a body in a well, poisoning the water for the family that lived there. It's not good enough. Everyone knows it's not good enough. These men deserve better than holes in the ground marked with scrap lumber. A local attorney named David Wills starts pushing for a proper cemetery, a place to honor the dead, a place where families can come to mourn. He buys 17 acres on Cemetery Hill, the same hill where Union troops made their stand, and begins the work of reinterring the bodies. It takes months. Workers dig up the temporary graves, try to identify the remains, move them to the new cemetery in neat rows organized by state. Sometimes identification is easy. Sometimes there's nothing left but bones and buttons. The dedication ceremony is scheduled for November 19th. They invite Edward Everett, the most famous orator in America, to give the main speech. They also invite President Lincoln, almost as an afterthought. Would he like to say a few words? Make some brief remarks after the main address? Lincoln says yes, but that's still months away. Right now, in the summer of 1863, Gettysburg is just trying to survive. The hospitals are overflowing. Men are dying every day, not from their wounds, but from infection, from disease, from sheer exhaustion. The surgeons work until they can't stand, then sleep for a few hours, then start again. They amputate limbs, by the hundreds. The pile of severed arms and legs behind one field hospital grows so high that soldiers start using it as a landmark. Turn left at the limb pile. The smell never goes away. Months later, people will say they can still smell it, that it's seeped into the walls, into the ground, into their clothes. The smell of Gettysburg. Farmers return to their fields to find crops trampled, fences destroyed, livestock stolen or killed. Some of them find worse things. Human remains that the burial details missed. Equipment, weapons, the debris of war scattered across land that was supposed to grow wheat. One farmer reportedly plows around a dead horse for weeks because he can't figure out how to move it. Another finds an unexploded shell in his field and has no idea what to do with it. The war has left a mess that will take years to clean up, and the wounded keep dying. Union wounded have it better, relatively speaking. They're moved to hospitals in the north, to cities with proper medical facilities, to places where their families can visit. Confederate wounded are prisoners of war. They stay in Gettysburg, in the overcrowded field hospitals, hoping they'll live long enough to be exchanged or paroled. Some of them do. Some of them don't. The last Confederate soldier at Gettysburg doesn't leave until the following spring. He's been too badly wounded to move, lying in a farmhouse bed while his captors decide what to do with him. By the time he's well enough to travel, the war has moved on to other places. When he finally heads south, the family that cared for him gives him food for the journey. They've spent months nursing this man, this enemy, back to health. They've grown fond of him despite everything. War is strange that way. It can make you hate people you've never met and love people you're supposed to kill. The summer turns to fall. The leaves change colour on the hills where so many men died. The smell fades a little. The town starts to feel almost normal if you don't look too closely at the fresh graves and the empty sleeves and the haunted eyes of the people who are there. And somewhere in Washington, Abraham Lincoln is working on a speech. Just a few words, brief remarks, nothing compared to what Edward Everett will deliver. Everett is planning a 2-hour oration, a masterpiece of classical rhetoric. Lincoln will follow with something much shorter. He writes on scraps of paper, crosses things out, starts over. He's trying to say something important, something that captures what all this death means, what the country is fighting for, why it matters that the Union won at Gettysburg. He doesn't know yet that his speech will become the most famous in American history, that school children will memorize it for the next 160 years, that his 272 words will outlast everything else about this battle, will outlast the generals and their tactics, will outlast the arguments about who won and who lost and what might have been different. He just knows he needs to say something true, something worthy of all those graves on that Pennsylvania hillside. 272 words that will define a nation. November 19th, 1863. 4.5 months after the battle. The morning is cold and grey, the kind of late autumn day when the sky seems to press down on you and the air bites at your cheeks. The trees on Cemetery Hill are bare now, their branches reaching up like fingers against the clouds. The grass has gone brown, brittle, crunching underfoot. The earth has settled over the graves, new mounds mixing with old ones. You can still smell it faintly, even after all these months. That smell that people in Gettysburg will never quite forget. It's fainter now, almost gone, but on cold mornings like this one, when the air is still and heavy, some people swear they can still catch it. Abraham Lincoln woke up with a headache. He's been feeling off for days, tired in a way sleep doesn't fix, achy in his bones. His son Tad is sick back in Washington, running a fever, and Lincoln's worried about him. Mary, his wife, begged him not to make this trip. Stay home, she said. Rest. Let someone else give the speech. What difference does it make if the president is there or not? But Lincoln felt like he had to come, had to see the place with his own eyes, had to stand where all those men fell and try to say something that mattered. He owes them that much. He owes their families that much. He's the one who called them to war. The least he can do is show up for the funeral. The train ride from Washington took most of the previous day. Lincoln spent the journey working on his speech, scribbling notes, crossing things out, starting over. The other passengers on the train left him alone. You don't interrupt the president when he's writing. He's staying at David Will's house, the same attorney who organized the cemetery. The house is crowded with dignitaries, politicians, military officers. Everyone wants to be seen at this dedication. Everyone wants to shake Lincoln's hand. Lincoln barely slept. Partly the noise, partly the headache, partly the weight of what he's about to do. The dedication ceremony is scheduled to begin at noon, but people have been gathering since dawn. They come by train, by carriage, by foot, families of the dead, veterans of the battle, curious citizens who want to witness history. By mid-morning, the crowd numbers somewhere between 15 and 20,000 people. It's strange to see so many living people on ground that held so many dead. The cemetery itself is still a work in progress. Only about a third of the Union dead have been reinterred so far. Workers are still digging up graves in the surrounding fields, still sorting through bones and buttons, still trying to match names to bodies. Some of the temporary graves have shifted in the rain, wooden markers knocked over or washed away. The work will continue for months after today. Confederate dead aren't buried here. They're still in their shallow graves across the battlefield, or in mass burial trenches that nobody has time to mark properly. Their families won't be able to visit. Most of them won't even know exactly where their boys are buried. That injustice will take decades to address, and even then, only partially. But the section that's finished is beautiful. Neat rows of white headstones, organised by state, radiating out from a central monument that hasn't been built yet. The graves fan out like the spokes of a wheel, each soldier facing outward, as if standing guard even in death. New York over here, Pennsylvania over there, Ohio, Maine. The geography of grief, organised and orderly. A wooden platform has been erected for the speakers. Lincoln climbs up and takes his seat. He looks out at the crowd, at the graves, at the hills beyond where the battle was fought. You can still see the scars on the landscape, broken trees, shell craters, the stone wall at the angle where so many men died trying to cross it. Edward Everett takes the podium first. Everett is everything Lincoln isn't. Polished, patrician, the most celebrated orator of his generation. He's been a senator, a governor, a secretary of state. He's given speeches that lasted 4 hours and left audiences weeping. Today, he's prepared a 2-hour address on the Battle of Gettysburg. He begins speaking at noon. For 2 hours, Everett holds the crowd in his palm. He describes the battle in sweeping terms, painting pictures with his words, taking the audience through each day of fighting. He compares Gettysburg to the great battles of ancient Greece. He praises the Union soldiers as heirs to Leonidas and his 300 Spartans. It's brilliant. It's moving. People weep. People cheer. When Everett finally finishes, the applause goes on for several minutes. Then it's Lincoln's turn. He unfolds a piece of paper. Some say he wrote the speech on the train. Some say he wrote it the night before at the Wills house. Some say he'd been working on it for weeks. Nobody knows for sure. Lincoln himself never said. He clears his throat. The crowd quiets. 77 years ago, he begins. His voice is higher than people expect. Thin, almost reedy. Not the booming bass of a great orator, but it carries. In the silence, every word reaches the back of the crowd. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He's not talking about the battle, not describing the charges or the tactics or the generals. He's talking about something bigger, something older. He's reaching back to the founding, to Jefferson's words, to the promise that started everything. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. That's the question, isn't it? The question the whole war is trying to answer. Can a government of the people, by the people, for the people, actually survive? Or will it tear itself apart like every republic before it? We have come to dedicate a portion of that field, as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. Lincoln pauses, looks out at the graves, at the crowd, at the hills where the fighting happened. But, in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. There's something humble in that, something honest. We're not making this ground sacred by standing here and giving speeches. The men who bled on it already did that. We're just witnesses. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. He's wrong about that, of course. The world will remember what he said, will memorize it, will carve it in stone. But Lincoln doesn't know that yet. He thinks he's giving forgettable remarks at a dedication ceremony. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. The unfinished work, that's what this is about. Not just remembering the dead, but continuing what they started, making sure they didn't die for nothing. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honoured dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. The last full measure of devotion, their lives, everything they had, everything they were. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. The crowd is silent now, perfectly still. You could hear a leaf fall. That this nation, under God, shall have new birth of freedom. A new birth, not just preserving what was, but making something better. The promise of 1876, finally kept. And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. He stops, folds his paper, sits down. The whole thing has taken about 2 minutes, maybe 3, 272 words, delivered in the time it takes to boil an egg. The crowd doesn't know how to react. After Everett's 2-hour masterpiece, Lincoln's speech feels almost incomplete, like he forgot the rest of it, like there should be more. There's scattered applause, polite but uncertain. People look at each other, wondering if that was really it. A photographer who was trying to set up his camera for a picture of Lincoln speaking doesn't even get his shot. It was over before he was ready. He'd been adjusting his equipment, waiting for the right moment, and suddenly Lincoln was sitting back down. All he has is a blurry image of the crowd. Some newspapers will mock the speech. Silly remarks, one will call it. A flat failure. They expected more from the president. More fire, more rhetoric, more of whatever it is that makes a speech feel like a speech, capital S. Lincoln thinks he's failed. That speech won't scour, he tells a friend afterward. An old expression meaning it won't clean up well, won't hold up to scrutiny. He thinks he's given a dud, wasted the moment. But something strange starts happening in the days that follow. Newspapers print the speech. People read it again. Something about those simple words, that plain language, starts to work on them, starts to feel important. Edward Everett writes Lincoln a letter. I should be glad if I could flatter myself that I came as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes. The man who gave the speech of a lifetime admits that Lincoln's 2 minutes were better. Over time, the Gettysburg Address becomes the thing everyone remembers. Everett's speech is forgotten except by historians. Lincoln's words get carved into marble, printed in textbooks, memorized by children. They become America's soul speech. the thing we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're supposed to be. All men are created equal. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. A new birth of freedom. Simple ideas, radical ideas, ideas that the country is still arguing about, still trying to live up to, 160 years later. But on that November afternoon, Lincoln just feels tired. His headache is worse. The ceremony is over. There's a reception to attend, hands to shake, conversations to endure. He wants to get back to Washington, back to Tad, back to his desk and the 1,000 problems that won't solve themselves. The train home feels longer than the train there. Lincoln slumps in his seat, exhausted. His head is pounding now, worse than this morning. His body aches. He doesn't know it yet, but he's coming down with a mild case of smallpox. The doctors will diagnose it in a few days. He'll recover, but the illness explains the fatigue, the headaches, the general feeling of being wrung out and empty. He stares out the window without really seeing anything, replays the speech in his head. Should have said this, shouldn't have said that. The endless second-guessing that comes after any performance, good or bad. A few aides sit with him, but they know better than to make conversation. The president needs quiet right now, needs to be alone with his thoughts. They pretend to read newspapers and let him be. Outside the train window, the Pennsylvania countryside rolls past. Fields and farms and small towns, the same landscape the armies marched through 5 months ago. Smoke rising from chimneys, children playing in yards, horses pulling wagons down dirt roads. It looks peaceful now, almost normal. You'd never know that 35,000 men fell here unless someone told you. That's how it is with battlefields. The land heals, the grass grows back, the trees put out new leaves. Eventually you can't tell the difference between a place where thousands died and a place where nothing happened at all. But people remember, the families remember, the survivors remember, and now, maybe because of Lincoln's words, everyone will remember. Back in Gettysburg, the crowd is dispersing. The ceremony is over. The cemetery will stay, the graves will stay, but the people have to go home, back to their lives, back to a war that isn't finished yet. A mother from Maine lingers at her son's grave. She's come all this way to see where he's buried, taken trains and coaches and walked the last mile up the hill. She had to see it for herself, had to know where he was. The headstone is simple, just a name and a regiment and a date. Nothing about who he was, nothing about how he loved fishing in the summer, nothing about the girl he'd promised to marry when he got home, nothing about the life he lived before the war turned him into a soldier, and then turned him into a body, and then turned him into a name on a stone. Just a name, one of thousands, in rows that stretch across the hillside like the teeth of a comb. She kneels in the cold grass and cries, doesn't care who sees, doesn't care about dignity or composure. Her boy is in the ground and she's never going to see him again, and all the speeches in the world won't change that. This is what battles come down to in the end. Not the tactics and the strategies, not the generals and their plans, just people. Ordinary people who get caught up in something bigger than themselves, who fight and die and leave holes in the world that never quite heal. The sun is setting over Cemetery Hill. The shadows of the headstone stretch long across the grass. The wind picks up cold and sharp, carrying the smell of wood smoke from the town below. Night is coming. Winter is coming. The war will go on for another 1.5 years. But something has changed. Something has shifted. The words Lincoln spoke today will outlast the war. will outlast him, will become part of the bedrock of the country, the foundation that everything else is built on. He doesn't know it yet. He just knows he's tired and his head hurts and he wants to go home. History's funny that way. The most important moments don't always feel important when you're living them. So what happened to everyone? Let's start with the men we followed through those 3 terrible days. Joshua Chamberlain, the college professor who led that bayonet charge down Little Roundtop, went on to become one of the most respected soldiers in the Union Army. He was wounded 6 times during the war. 6 times. Each time the doctors said he probably wouldn't make it. Each time he proved them wrong. At Petersburg in 1864, he took a bullet through both hips that should have killed him. The ball passed through his body, tearing through organs that nobody survives losing. Grant promoted him to brigadier general on the spot, expecting him to die that night. The promotion was supposed to be a final honour for a dying hero. He didn't die. Chamberlain survived somehow through some combination of luck and stubbornness, and maybe just not being finished yet. He spent months recovering, then went right back to the front lines. His men couldn't believe it. The Walking Dead, they called him, the man who wouldn't quit. And when Robert E. Lee finally surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse in April of 1865, it was Joshua Chamberlain who was chosen to receive the formal surrender of the Confederate infantry, to accept their flags and their weapons, to be the face of the Union at the war's end. The college professor from Maine, standing there as the curtain came down on 4 years of slaughter. He did something remarkable that day, something nobody expected. As the defeated Confederate soldiers marched past to stack their arms, Chamberlain ordered his men to salute them, a sign of respect. Soldier to soldier, enemy to enemy. The Confederates, stunned and exhausted and broken, returned the salute. For a moment they weren't enemies anymore, just men who'd survived something terrible together. It was a moment of grace in a war that had very little grace in it. Chamberlain went home to Maine after the war, became governor, then president of Bowdoin College, the same school where he'd taught before everything changed. He lived until 1914, long enough to see automobiles and airplanes and the world transformed into something those boys at Little Roundtop never could have imagined. He never fully recovered from his wounds. The bullet through his hips caused problems for the rest of his life, but he never complained, never talked about it unless someone asked. He just kept going, 1 foot in front of the other, the way he'd kept going up that hill. Daniel Sickles, the one-legged congressman who got all those men killed with his unauthorized advance, had a very different kind of afterlife. He went back to politics, served as a diplomat, got into scandals, got out of scandals, spent decades defending his decision at Gettysburg, arguing that his move to the Peach Orchard actually saved the Union Army by disrupting Lee's plans. Historians still argue about whether he was right. He visited his leg at the Army Medical Museum every year on the anniversary of the battle, brought friends sometimes, showed off the bones like they were a trophy. "There it is," he'd say, pointing at the display case. "There's my leg. The museum still has it. You can go see it today if you want." Daniel Sickles' leg, sitting in a little wooden box in Washington, D.C. He donated it himself, wanted people to remember. Sickles lived until 1914 too, same year as Chamberlain, the last, 2 generals of Gettysburg, dying within months of each other, half a century after the battle that made them famous. Winfield Hancock, the one who got shot in the thigh on Cemetery Ridge, recovered from his wound and kept fighting. After the war, he ran for president. lost to James Garfield by less than 10,000 votes out of 9 million cast. One of the closest elections in American history. He carried that bent nail from Gettysburg in his pocket for the rest of his life. A reminder, a souvenir, a piece of that stone wall where so many men died. George Pickett, whose name is forever attached to that doomed charge, never recovered from what he saw that day. He resigned from the army after the war, refused to talk about Gettysburg, refused to forgive Robert E. Lee. When someone asked him why the charge failed, he said the Yankees had something to do with it, but you could tell he was still angry, still hurt, still wondering why those men had to die. He worked as an insurance salesman after the war, died in 1875, only 50 years old. Some say he drank himself to death. Some say it was just the weight of all those memories. Robert E. Lee went home to Virginia after the surrender, became president of Washington College, spent his last years trying to rebuild the South, trying to heal the wounds, telling young men to be good Americans and stop fighting old battles. He died in 1870, only 5 years after the war ended. His last words were, "Strike the tent," an old army command. Even at the end, he was still a soldier. And Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln went back to Washington after the dedication ceremony, recovered from his smallpox, kept fighting the war, kept writing letters to generals, kept holding the country together through his sheer force of will, kept believing that the Union would survive and that all men really were created equal, even when everything seemed hopeless. He aged terribly during the war. Photographs from 1860 show a vigorous man with dark hair. Photographs from 1865 show someone who looks 20 years older. The war took everything out of him. Every casualty report, every battle lost, every mother's letter asking why her son had to die. In April of 1865, 5 days after Lee surrendered, Lincoln went to a play at Ford's Theatre. He was exhausted but relieved. The war was finally ending. Maybe now he could rest. A man named John Wilkes Booth, an actor, a Confederate sympathizer, a man who thought he was saving the South, crept up behind the president's box and fired a single shot into the back of his head. Lincoln died the next morning in a boarding house across the street from the theatre. He was 56 years old. The country he'd saved didn't get to keep him. He never saw the end of the war he'd been fighting, never saw the constitutional amendments that abolished slavery forever, never saw the freed slaves build new lives, start families, become citizens, never saw the country he'd held together begin to heal. He gave everything he had, and then he was gone. His body was carried by train from Washington to Springfield, Illinois, where he'd started his political career all those years ago. The train took 2 weeks, stopping in cities along the way so people could say goodbye. Millions of Americans lined the tracks, standing in fields and on rooftops and beside country roads, watching the funeral train pass, mourning the man who'd held them together through the worst years of their history. They called him Father Abraham, the great emancipator, the savior of the Union, but mostly they just called him Lincoln, and they wept. The Gettysburg Address followed him into immortality. Those 272 words became the thing that Lincoln is remembered for, more than anything else, more than winning the war, more than freeing the slaves. Those simple sentences, delivered in 2 minutes on a cold November afternoon, became the soul of America. All men are created equal. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. The words got carved into the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, got printed in textbooks, got memorized by schoolchildren for generations, and Gettysburg itself. The battlefield is a national park now, has been for over 100 years. You can drive through it, walk the paths, stand on the same ground where all those men fought and died. Little Roundtop is still there, the rocks and trees, the slope where the 20th Maine made their charge. You can climb to the spot where Joshua Chamberlain stood and look down at the ground the Alabamians had to cross. The stone wall at the angle is still there, patched and preserved, marking the high water mark of the Confederacy. A bronze book on a pedestal marks the exact spot where the Confederate advance was stopped. The farthest north they ever got. The place where the tide turned. People come from all over the world to see it. Japanese tourists, German students, families from California who drove across the country just to walk these fields. They stand where Pickett's men stood, looking across that open ground towards Cemetery Ridge, and they try to imagine what it must have felt like to start walking toward those guns. Most of them can't imagine it. Not really. The distance is too far. The task is too impossible. They shake their heads and take photographs and buy souvenirs from the gift shop, but something stays with them. Something about this place. The monuments are everywhere. Over 1,000 of them scattered across the battlefield like a forest of stone and bronze. Statues of generals on horseback, their sabres raised, frozen in mid-charge forever. Obelisks marking where regiments fought and died. Plaques listing the names of the dead in tiny letters that blur together when you try to read them all. Every state that sent soldiers to Gettysburg has built something to remember them by. Pennsylvania has the most, of course, but there are monuments from Maine and Minnesota, from New York and New Jersey, from states that don't even exist anymore in the same form. The whole battlefield is a memorial to the dead. At night, when the tourists are gone and the park rangers have locked the gates, they say you can still feel something out there. Something in the air, a heaviness, a presence, the weight of all that history, pressing down on the land like a hand on your chest. The town of Gettysburg recovered eventually. The smell faded. The fields were replanted. The bullet holes in the buildings were patched over or turned into tourist attractions. Some families kept the damage, pointed it out to visitors. See that hole? Came from the battle. Life went on, the way it always does. People got married, had children, died of old age. The battle became history, and then it became legend. But nobody who was there ever forgot. How could they? There are photographs from the reunions decades later. The 50th anniversary in 1913. Old men, white-bearded and bent, wearing faded uniforms that didn't quite fit anymore. Old men in grey and old men in blue shaking hands across that stone wall, crying, laughing, embracing like brothers. 50,000 veterans came to that reunion. 50,000 men in their 70s and 80s, some of them carried in wheelchairs, some of them barely able to walk. They came from every state, north and south. They slept in tents, just like they had 50 years before. They walked the fields they'd fought over as young men, and they talked. God, how they talked. Stories they'd never told anyone, memories they'd buried for half a century. They found the spots where their friends had fallen. They looked for the rocks they'd hidden behind. They stood on Little Roundtop and Cemetery Ridge and the peach orchard, and they remembered. Enemies who became something else. Survivors who understood each other in ways that no one else ever could. The only people on Earth who knew what it had really been like. The last veteran of Gettysburg died in 1938. A man named Albert Woolson, who'd been a drummer boy in the Union Army. Just a kid back then. 17 years old, beating the drum while the world exploded around him. He was 106 years old when he passed. The last living link to those 3 days in July, gone. But the story doesn't end there. Stories like this never really end. Every year, people still gather at Gettysburg to remember. They dress in period uniforms and reenact the battles. They lay wreaths at the graves. They read the Gettysburg Address out loud, those familiar words echoing across the same hills where Lincoln spoke them. They're trying to keep something alive, trying to make sure we don't forget what happened here, what it cost, what it meant. Because here's the thing about Gettysburg, it's not just a battle, it's not just a turning point in a war. It's a reminder that the things we take for granted, the freedoms we live with every day, somebody had to fight for them. Somebody had to die for them. Somebody had to stand on a rocky hill with a bayonet and charge downhill into the guns. The country you live in exists because those men did what they did. Because they held the line when everything told them to run. Because they believed in something bigger than themselves, even if they couldn't always put it into words. That's worth remembering. That's worth thinking about on quiet nights like this one. And now, here you are, lying in your bed, warm and safe, in a world those soldiers couldn't have imagined. No cannons in the distance, no smoke on the horizon, no lists of the dead to read in tomorrow's newspaper. Just quiet, just peace, just the soft sounds of night settling in around you. The men who fought at Gettysburg would have given anything for a night like this. A night without fear, a night without the sound of guns, a night where they could close their eyes and know that nothing terrible was coming. You have that, right now, this moment. The sheets beneath you, soft and clean, the pillow cradling your head, the darkness behind your eyelids, gentle and deep. These small comforts that we forget to notice, that we take for granted. They're not small at all, they're everything. So let yourself sink into that comfort. Let your body get heavy. Let your thoughts slow down like leaves settling on still water. The battle is over, the speeches are done, the dead are at rest, and you're here in this quiet moment with nothing to do but breathe. In and out, slow and steady, the rhythm of rest. The same moon that rose over Gettysburg on those July nights is rising somewhere now. The same stars, the same slow turning of the earth toward morning. But morning is a long way off, and you don't have to think about it yet. Just let go. Let the weight of the day fall away. Let the stories settle into that space between waking and sleeping, where they can keep you company without keeping you awake. You're safe here. You're warm. You're home. That's all any of them wanted. All those soldiers, on both sides, they just wanted to go home, and you're already there. So close your eyes. Let your breathing slow. Let the night wrap around you like a blanket. The story's done. Sleep now.